In the cold mathematics of naval warfare, there exists an equation that has held true since the first submarine slipped beneath the waves. Submarine plus destroyer equals death. Not sometimes. Not usually. Always. A submarine, you see, is not built to fight. It is built to hide. To lurk in the dark spaces of the ocean, picking off the slow and vulnerable, the cargo ships, the tankers, the fat transports loaded with supplies. The submarine is the assassin of the sea, striking from shadows and vanishing before the alarm is raised. But a destroyer? A destroyer is something else entirely. It is the avenging angel, the hunter of hunters. With a top speed of 35 knots, it can run down a submerged submarine the way a cheetah runs down a wounded gazelle. Its sonar can pierce the darkness, turning the ocean's protective veil into transparency. Its depth charges can crack a submarine's pressure hull like an eggshell, sending 80 men to graves that will never be marked. Between December 1941 and the spring of 1944, Japanese destroyers sent 14 American submarines to the bottom of the Pacific. 14 boats, more than 1,000 men, gone. In that same bloody span of time, the number of Japanese destroyers sunk by American submarines in direct combat, not torpedoed while they escorted convoys, but actively engaged in the deadly dance of hunter versus hunter, was 0. Not one. The doctrine was carved in steel and written in blood. If a destroyer finds you, you do not fight. You dive to 300 feet. You shut down everything that makes noise, the air conditioning, the pumps, even the Eurocompass. You rig for silent running and hold your breath while the destroyer prowls above you, listening, waiting, dropping its charges. You pray that the ocean is deep enough, that your boat is quiet enough, that your luck holds just one more time. You do not, under any circumstances, surface and fight. You do not charge toward the destroyer. You do not turn your submarine into a goddamn battering ram and try to sink the bastard with your own hull. Unless, of course, your name is Eugene Fluckey. And unless your submarine is USS Barb. This is the story of the boat that rewrote the rules, the commander who ignored every manual ever written, and the crew that followed him straight into the mouth of hell. Again and again and again, until the entire Japanese Navy learned to fear a single name whispered across the Pacific. The Americans were coming, and they weren't running anymore. March 1944, Pearl Harbor. Commander Eugene Fluckey stood on the pier at Pearl Harbor, watching USS Barb take on fuel and torpedoes for her 7th War Patrol. At 31 years old, he'd been commanding the boat for just over a year, and in that time, he developed a reputation that made admirals nervous and his crew either worship him or think he'd lost his mind. Probably both. "Sir." Message from ComSub Pack. Lieutenant Commander Dave Webster said, handing over the clipboard. Webster was Fluckey's executive officer, a by-the-book officer who'd learned that Fluckey's book had chapters the Navy had never authorized. Fluckey scanned the orders. Formosa Strait, the waters between Taiwan and mainland China. Some of the most dangerous hunting grounds in the Pacific, thick with Japanese convoys and the destroyers that guarded them. "Looks like they're sending us back to the wolf's den," Webster observed. "Good," Fluckey said, his voice flat. "I'm tired of shooting fish in a barrel." This was pure Fluckey. Other submarine commanders celebrated easy targets. Fluckey got bored. He'd already sunk 15 enemy ships in 6 patrols, using tactics that made the Naval War College staff tear their hair out. Surface attacks at night, penetrating harbors that were supposed to be impenetrable, firing torpedoes from ranges so close that if they malfunctioned, Barb would be destroyed by her own weapons. "Captain," Webster said carefully, "you know, the Japanese have reinforced their ASW patrols in that area. More destroyers, better sonar. They're learning." "So are we," Fluckey replied. He looked at his exec, his eyes hard. "Dave, how many boats have we lost this year?" Webster knew the answer. Every submariner knew the answer. 11 confirmed. 3 more overdue and presumed lost. 14 boats. Maybe 15. 1,000 men. Fluckey's jaw tightened. "You know why? Bad luck. Faulty torpedoes. Japanese ASW. Caution," Fluckey interrupted. "Fear. Commanders who follow the doctrine so religiously that they're predictable. The Japanese know we dive when they find us. They know we run silent. They know exactly how we're trained to react. He paused. So I'm going to teach them something new. Webster had learned not to ask what that meant. He'd find out soon enough. For days later, USS Barb slipped out of Pearl Harbor and headed west, into waters where the Japanese were waiting. The crew numbered 80 men. Farm boys from Iowa, mechanics from Detroit, a former fisherman from Maine who claimed he could smell enemy ships before the sonar found them. They were young. Most were barely old enough to drink, and they believed their captain could walk on water. Or under it. In the wardroom that first night at sea, Fluckey gathered his officers for what he called advanced education. Gentlemen, I'm going to tell you something the Naval War College doesn't teach. He spread a chart on the table. A destroyer isn't invincible. It's fast, yes. It has depth charges, yes. But it has weaknesses. With respect, sir, said Lieutenant Paul Saunders, the youngest officer aboard. What weaknesses? They can run us down, bomb us into scrap metal, and they assume we'll run, Fluckey said. That's their weakness. Their entire tactical doctrine is built on the idea that we'll dive and hide. They're trained to hunt a fleeing target, not one that fights back. He tapped the chart. A destroyer's sonar has a blind spot directly underneath it. Its depth charges are set to detonate at specific depths, which means if you're at the wrong depth or the right one, depending on how you look at it, they can't touch you. And most importantly, a destroyer's commander thinks like a destroyer commander. He expects us to act like submariners. So we act like something else? Webster asked. Fluckey smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. We act like a destroyer that happens to be underwater. Over the next week, as Barb crossed the Pacific, Fluckey drilled his crew relentlessly. Emergency surface procedures. High-speed surface running. Firing torpedoes on the surface at maximum speed. A maneuver that wasn't in any manual because it was considered suicidal. The boat would be exposed, vulnerable, and easy target, unless it was moving too fast and too aggressively for the enemy to react. Again, Fluckey shouted as the crew ran through the drill for the 10th time. From the time I give the order to surface to the time we have tubes 1 through 6 ready to fire, I want 60 seconds. Not 70. Not 65. 60. They practiced until they could do it in their sleep. Surface. Load. Fire. Dive. Every man knew his role, knew the timing, knew that if they fumbled for even 5 seconds, they'd all die together. On March 23, 1944, USS Barb entered the Formosa Strait. The education was over. The exam was about to begin. ## Chapter 2. The Night of the Wolves. March 31, 1944, Formosa Strait, 0243 hours. The radar operator's voice cut through the control room like a knife. Multiple contacts. Bearing 270. Range 12,000 yards. Count 5. No 6 targets. 3 large, 3 small. Fluckey was at the scope in seconds. Through the lens, in the pre-dawn darkness, he could make out the silhouettes. 3 cargo ships in column formation, escorted by 3 destroyers. A standard convoy, probably carrying supplies to the Philippines or the Dutch East Indies. Standard prey. Standard predators. Battle stations torpedo, Fluckey ordered, his voice calm. The crew had heard that tone before. It meant the captain was about to do something crazy. Sir, recommend we plot a submerged approach, Webster said. Let the convoy pass. Then hit the rear ship and dive. Negative. Fluckey studied the formation through the periscope. The destroyers were running a pattern, 1 ahead, 1 on each flank. Professional. Careful. Exactly by the book. Which meant predictable. We're going to surface, Fluckey announced. The control room went silent. Surface? With 3 destroyers actively screening? Captain, Webster began. I'm going to run right between the escorts and the convoy. On the surface. 20 knots. We'll be inside their screen before they realize we're not one of their own. It was insane. A surface submarine was slow and vulnerable compared to a destroyer. If the Japanese spotted them, Barb would be blown out of the water before she could dive. But if they didn't spot them, sir, Permission to speak freely? Webster asked. Denied. Battle stations. Stand by to surface. The crew moved like machinery, every man pushing down his fear, trusting in the captain who'd brought them through 6 patrols without a casualty. In the forward torpedo room, warheads were armed. In the engine room, the diesels were ready to roar to life. Throughout the boat, men checked their stations one final time. All stations report ready, Captain. Surface. Barb broke the surface like a breaching whale, water streaming off her deck. The diesels coughed to life, their growl rising to a thunder as the submarine surged forward, bow wave curling white in the darkness. All ahead flank, left full rudder. They were committed now, no turning back. Either this worked or they'd be fighting for their lives in minutes. Through the bridge binoculars, Fluckey watched the convoy. The destroyers continued their patrol pattern, unaware that death had just surfaced half a mile away. Why would they look inward? The threat came from outside the screen, from submarines that attacked submerged and invisible. Not from a boat charging through the darkness at 20 knots with its bow pointed at their convoy like a torpedo itself. Range 3,000 yards. The radar operator called up. Escorts haven't changed course. They haven't seen us. Steady on, Fluckey said. His hands were rock steady on the binoculars. Stand by tubes 1 through 6. They were inside the screen now, between the destroyers and the cargo ships. The nearest escort was less than 2,000 yards away. If anyone on that destroyer looked in the right direction, if anyone saw Barb's low silhouette against the dark water. Firing solution set, Webster reported, his voice tight. Range to lead ship? 1,800 yards, sir. Point-blank range. So close that if the torpedoes malfunctioned and surfaced, they'd circle back and might hit Barb instead. So close that when the ships exploded, the shock wave would rattle every rivet in the submarine's hull. Fire 1. The submarine shuddered as the first torpedo leaped from its tube. Fire 2. Fire 3. Sir, the rear destroyer is turning, the lookout shouted. They've spotted us. Fire 4, 5, and 6. Hard right rudder. All ahead flank. The last 3 torpedoes launched just as the destroyer's searchlight snapped on. The beam sweeping across the water, hunting. But Barb was already turning, already accelerating, her diesels howling at maximum power. Then the first torpedo found its target. The lead cargo ship, the Fouquet Maru, disappeared in a pillar of fire that climbed 500 feet into the night sky. The explosion was so massive that, for a moment, the entire ocean was lit up like daylight. The second ship, the Yamashimo Maru, took 2 hits amidships. Its back broke with a sound like the world cracking, and it began to sink. To sink immediately, bow and stern rising as the middle collapsed. Dive! 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 Fluckey shouted. Barb nosed down, water flooding into her ballast tanks, dragging her under. On the bridge, Fluckey and the lookouts were already scrambling down the ladder as the ocean rose up to meet them. The hatch clanged shut just as the first depth charge exploded. The destroyer was above them, its sonar pinging, the sound echoing through Barb's hull like a death knell. Every man aboard knew what was coming. They'd drilled for this, trained for it, prayed they'd never have to experience it. Depth charges. The first pattern landed close. 6 charges detonating in sequence, each one sending a hammer blow through the water that smashed into the submarine's hull. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation fell from the overhead. In the forward torpedo room, a young seaman began to hyperventilate. Rig for silent running, Webster ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. Throughout the boat, men shut down equipment, turned off lights, stood frozen at their stations. The only sounds were the ping of enemy sonar and their own racing heartbeats. Another pattern, closer this time. The submarine groaned, metal flexing under impossible pressure. Somewhere in the boat, something cracked. A small sound, but in the silence it might as well have been a gunshot. Depth? Fluckey asked quietly. 250 feet, Captain. The ocean here was 400 feet deep. They had room to go deeper, but deeper meant more pressure, more stress on the hull, and if they went too deep, the submarine would simply implode, crushed by the weight of the sea. Above them, the destroyer made another pass. The sonar ping grew louder, more insistent. The Japanese sonar operator had a solid contact now. He knew where they were. The next pattern would be right on top of them. All ahead 1/3, Fluckey ordered. Left 10 degrees rudder. Sir. Webster's eyes went wide. We're supposed to be silent. We're about to be dead, Fluckey interrupted. The destroyer knows where we are. Playing possum just makes us a stationary target. We need to move. It violated every rule of submarine warfare. When being depth-charged, you went silent, went deep, and hoped the destroyer lost track of you. You didn't make noise. You didn't move. Unless you were Eugene Fluckey, and you'd decided the rules were written by men who weren't trying hard enough to survive. The propellers engaged, their hum filling the water. Above, the destroyer's sonar operator heard it immediately, adjusting his estimate of Barb's position. But he adjusted wrong, because Fluckey had turned the boat slightly, and the sonar return was now coming from where Barb had been, not where she was going. The difference was only 30 yards, but in the mathematics of depth-charge warfare, 30 yards was the difference between destruction and survival. The third pattern landed where Barb had been. The charges detonated with earth-shattering force, but the submarine was already 30 yards away. Then 40, then 50, moving slowly but steadily out of the kill zone. He's making another pass, the sonar operator whispered. Bearing 290, range decreasing. Maintain course and speed, Fluckey said. Steady as she goes. The destroyer made 4 more passes. Each time, Barb kept moving, kept turning, kept staying just outside the lethal radius. Each time, the depth charges got a little less accurate, the destroyer's sonar a little less certain. After 40 minutes, the destroyer sounds began to fade. After 50 minutes, they were gone. Fluckey waited another 30 minutes before giving the order. Secure from silent running. Take us up to periscope depth. As Barb rose toward the surface, the crew began to breathe again. They'd survived. Not by hiding, not by playing dead, but by fighting back in a way the Japanese had never anticipated. When Fluckey raised the periscope, dawn was breaking over the Formosa Strait. In the distance, he could see smoke on the horizon, the funeral pyres of the 2 cargo ships they'd sunk. And there, limping away, was the convoy's surviving destroyer, still looking for the submarine that should have been dead. Mark your position, Fluckey said. We'll be back here tomorrow night. Same time, same tactics. Webster stared at him. Captain, they'll be ready for us. They'll have every destroyer in the area. Good, Fluckey said. Then we'll have more targets. In the control room, the crew exchanged glances. Their captain had just attacked a defended convoy on the surface, sunk 2 ships, survived a depth charge attack, and his response was to do it again. They were sailing with either the craziest man in the Navy or the most brilliant. Time would tell which. Or maybe, some of them were beginning to realize he was both. The whispers started in Tokyo after the 3rd attack. Japanese naval intelligence had a problem they couldn't explain. American submarines were supposed to run from destroyers. It was in every report, every analysis, every tactical document. The Americans dove deep, rigged for silent running, and prayed to survive. They were prey, not predators. But something had changed. Commander Takashi Hashimoto sat in the Naval Intelligence Office, staring at the reports scattered across his desk. 3 separate convoy attacks in 3 weeks. Each one followed an impossible pattern. Submarine surfaces, penetrates escort screen, fires at point-blank range, escapes despite aggressive pursuit. It's the same boat, he said, tapping the documents. It has to be. His colleague, Lieutenant Saito, shook his head. Submarine commanders don't attack like this. It's suicidal. And yet this commander has sunk 9 ships in 3 weeks. If it's suicidal, why isn't he dead? Hashimoto pulled out a map, marking the attack locations. Look at the pattern. They don't. 1 destroyer hunting alone, which means he's confident. Overconfident. Fluckey looked at his exec. Do it, and stand by for full ahead. Flank on my command. As Barb rose through the water, every man aboard felt his stomach tighten. They were ascending into danger, moving toward the hunter instead of away from it. It violated every instinct, every training drill. 90 feet, Captain. Sonar, what's the destroyer doing? Still pinging, sir. He knows we're here, but he's... Wait. The sonar operator pressed his headphones tighter. He's turning, coming straight at us. Range 800 yards and closing. Perfect, Fluckey murmured. That's exactly what I wanted. Captain, if you could share with the rest of us what you're planning, Webster began. He's gonna try to run right over us. Standard tactic. Force us deeper, then drop charges. Except we're not going deeper. Fluckey raised the periscope, taking a quick look. There he is. Coming fast, probably 30 knots. Range 500 yards, sonar reported. 400. 300. The crew could hear it now. The destroyer's screws, a thunderous roar growing louder, closer, like a freight train approaching. 200 yards. Sir, he's right on top of us. All ahead flank, Fluckey shouted. Up angle 15 degrees. Surface, surface, surface. What happened next would be talked about in submarine service bars for the next 50 years. Barb erupted from the ocean like a missile, her bow breaking the surface at a steep angle, water cascading off her hull. The sudden upward surge, the violent surfacing maneuver, sent every man aboard grabbing for handholds. And the destroyer, charging at full speed, suddenly found itself facing a submarine that wasn't running away. It was charging directly at him. On the destroyer's bridge, Captain Nagumo had perhaps 3 seconds to process what his eyes were telling him. The submarine they'd been hunting was now on the surface, bow pointed directly at his ship, and closing at a combined speed of nearly 50 knots. There was no time to turn. No time to maneuver. Barb. There was no time to turn. No time to maneuver. Barb struck the destroyer's hull at 20 knots, her reinforced bow slamming into Sammy-Dare just forward of the bridge. The impact threw every man on the submarine off his feet. Metal screamed. Rivets popped. For a moment, the two ships were locked together, the submarine's bow actually riding up onto the destroyer's deck. Back full. Back full. Fluckey roared, picking himself up off the deck. Barb's engines reversed, her screws biting water, dragging the submarine backward. She pulled free from the destroyer with a tortured shriek of tearing metal. Through the bridge binoculars, Fluckey could see the damage. The destroyer had a massive gash in its hull, water flooding in, the ship already listing to port. Men on deck were running, shouting, trying to organize damage control. Dive! 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 For the second time in minutes, Barb submerged, this time leaving chaos on the surface behind her. As she descended to 200 feet, the crew could hear secondary explosions from above, the destroyer's forward magazine cooking off, the ship breaking apart. In the control room, men stared at each other in stunned silence. Did we just? Someone began. We just rammed a destroyer, Webster finished, his voice hollow. We just deliberately rammed a destroyer and sank it. Fluckey was studying the depth gauge, listening to the sounds from above. The destroyer's death throes were clearly audible. The groan of tortured metal, the rush of water flooding compartments, the screams of the screws as they lifted out of the water. Secure from battle stations, he said calmly. Damage report. The reports came in. The bow had some buckling, nothing structural. A few small leaks that were easily patched. Minor flooding in the forward ballast tanks. Injuries, 1 broken arm, several bruises, 1 case of whiplash. They'd rammed a destroyer at combined closing speed of 50 knots and survived with basically a bent fender. Captain, Webster said slowly. That should not have worked. But it did, Fluckey replied. And now the Japanese have something new to worry about. They need to fear submarines that don't run. Submarines that fight back. Submarines that might be crazy enough to ram them. He walked to the periscope, taking one final look at the surface. The destroyer was gone, sunk with all hands. Another impossible victory in a patrol that was rewriting the rule book. Set course for our patrol area, he ordered. Let's go find something else to sink. As Barb moved through the dark waters, Her crew began to realize something fundamental had changed. They weren't just submariners anymore. They weren't just hunters. They were becoming something the Japanese had never encountered before. A submarine that made destroyers afraid. And Eugene Fluckey was teaching them, one impossible victory at a time, that the old rules didn't apply anymore. You could fight a destroyer. You could charge when doctrine said to retreat. You could turn a submarine into a battering ram and live to tell about it. All you needed was the will to try and a captain crazy enough to lead the way. Barb had both. And the Japanese Navy was about to learn what that meant. ## Chapter 4. Into the Devil's Throat. June 1944, Nam Quan Harbor, China. The reconnaissance photos spread across the wardroom table showed 30 Japanese ships nestled safely inside Nam Quan Harbor. 30. Cargo vessels, tankers, troop transports, millions of tons of supplies the Japanese thought were untouchable. They thought wrong. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Webster said carefully, pointing at the harbor entrance. "This channel is 800 yards wide, mined and covered by shore batteries. The harbor itself is 23 feet deep at high tide. We draw 25 feet when surfaced, 17 when submerged. So we have 6 feet of clearance at high tide if we're submerged." Fluckey mused, "Study the charts. 6 feet if the charts are accurate, if the tide tables are correct, and if we don't hit one of these mines." Webster tapped the map. "Captain, no submarine has ever penetrated a harbor this shallow. It's a death trap. Which is exactly why the Japanese think they're safe there." Fluckey had been studying Nam Quan Harbor for 3 days, ever since a reconnaissance aircraft had brought back photos showing the concentration of ships. 30 vessels, sitting in neat rows like ducks in a shooting gallery. The kind of target that came along once in a war. The kind of target that could end a patrol with either glory or disaster, nothing in between. "We'll go in at midnight," Fluckey announced. "High tide is at 0047. We'll time it perfectly. Enter submerged, surface once we're inside, fire everything we've got, then get out before they realize what happened. And if we run aground, then we scuttle the boat and try to make it to Chinese guerrilla territory." Fluckey said it so calmly he might have been discussing the weather. "But we won't run aground." Over the next 2 days, Barb positioned herself off the harbor entrance, staying deep during the day, rising to periscope depth at night to study the approaches. Fluckey watched the patrol boats, timed their movements, noted the searchlight patterns. He studied the tide charts until he had them memorized. He calculated angles, speeds, depths. On the night of June 8, 1944, USS Barb began her approach to Nam Quan Harbor. June 8, 1944 to 23:15 hours. "Depth under keel?" Fluckey asked. 8 feet, sir. 8 feet between the submarine's keel and the ocean floor. One mistake, one miscalculation, and they'd be stuck fast, helpless targets for every gun in the harbor. Ahead 1/3. Steady as she goes. Barb crept forward through the darkness, submerged at periscope depth, barely moving. Through the scope, Fluckey could see the harbor entrance approaching, a narrow throat between two headlands, searchlights sweeping back and forth, a patrol boat puttering back and forth across the entrance. "Patrol boat range?" he asked softly. 1,200 yards, sir. Bearing steady. He's not moving. The patrol boat was stationed right in the middle of the entrance, a guardian at the gate, and he wasn't moving, which meant Barb would have to slip past him at a range of less than 600 yards. Reduce speed to 1/4. Dead silent running. The submarine slowed to a crawl, for knots, barely moving. So slow that any slower and they'd lose steerage control. Through the scope, Fluckey watched the patrol boat. Could they see the periscope? Did they have sonar? Were they broadcasting an alarm right now? 500 yards. 400. The patrol boat's searchlight swept across the water, passing just over Barb's periscope. Fluckey ducked instinctively, even though he knew the light couldn't penetrate underwater. 300 yards. They were in the entrance now, committed. The headlands rose on either side, close enough that Fluckey could see individual buildings on shore, could see soldiers standing near the batteries. If anyone looked in the right place at the right moment, Depth under keel? He whispered. 4 feet, sir. 4 feet. Less than the height of a man. If the charts were off by even a few inches, if there was a sandbar or a rock outcropping not marked on the maps, they'd tear their belly open. Steady as she goes. They were past the patrol boat now, inside the harbor. Through the scope, Fluckey could see the fleet. Row after row of ships, dark silhouettes against the slightly less dark sky. Take us up. Stand by to surface. Sir, we're still inside the harbor, Webster protested. If we surface, every gun in the... We'll be pointing at empty water when we open fire, Fluckey finished. Surface. Battle stations. Rose from the depths, breaking the surface with barely a ripple. The diesels coughed to life, muffled but still audible in the quiet harbor. On shore a dog barked. Load all tubes, Fluckey ordered. I want a spread that covers the maximum area. We're going to fire, turn, fire the stern tubes, and then run like hell. The targeting solutions came quickly. At this range, less than 1,000 yards, you could hardly miss. The forward tubes were lined up on a cluster of tankers. The stern tubes would take the cargo ships. Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3, fire 4, fire 5, fire 6. 6 torpedoes leaped into the water, their wakes visible in the darkness. Fluckey didn't wait to see them hit. Right full rudder. Bring stern tubes to bear. Barb was still turning when the first torpedo struck. The lead tanker exploded with such force that the shock wave rippled across the harbor, setting off car alarms in the nearby town. Then the second hit. The third. The harbor erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed. Searchlights snapped on, sweeping randomly. On shore, the batteries began firing, but they were shooting blind, not knowing where the attack was coming from. Fire 7, Fire 8, Fire 9, Fire 10. The stern tubes emptied their loads into the cargo ships. More explosions, more fires. The entire harbor was lit up now, bright as noon, black smoke rising in huge columns. All ahead flank. Make for the entrance. Barb charged through the harbor, her diesels screaming, bow throwing spray. Behind her, ships were sinking, burning, exploding as their cargo caught fire. Ahead, the narrow entrance, and beyond it, the open sea and safety. Then the shore batteries found them. The first shell landed 50 yards off the port beam, throwing up a geyser of water. The second hit the water 20 yards ahead. They were bracketing now, finding the range. Zigzag pattern, Fluckey shouted. Don't give them a steady target. Began weaving through the water, turning left, then right, then left again. Shells rained down around them, each one close enough.